You know, I don't think I've ever bought a game I've been looking forward to for years, only to toss it aside immediately for a demo that came with it. Though I can imagine that buying Zone of the Enders just for the MGS2 demo would have been pretty much the same. Anyway, I figured I'd give my thoughts on the Final Fantasy 15 demo that came out last week along with Final Fantasy Type 0. Because I'm sure you're all dying to know. Now, something that I feel I should say before saying anything else is that this demo is meant to show off some of the game's gameplay features and to prove that Final Fantasy 15 actually does exist, though I remain skeptical. But yeah, there really isn't any story to comment on and only a few cutscenes. But what's there was actually looking pretty fucking good. And sure, just as always, the voice acting in the dub won't be incredible, but at least there's an option to turn on the Japanese dub for those who'd prefer that. Although there's a shit ton of banter going on outside of the cutscenes, and I can imagine that the subs could be a bit hard to follow while fighting and exploring. So I'm not sure how ideal it would be to play the game with subtitles. Anyway, enough dingle fucking around and let's start talking about the gameplay. First off, the open world. So moving around feels very free and unrestricted, which, considering Square's track record with rather limited movement, actually comes as a welcome surprise. I mean, you're able to jump over fences, stand on things, walk through water, and even run around like a fucking madman. However, the grass plains presented in the demo are kinda barren-ish. Like, there are some cabins hidden in the woods and stuff, but you can't really do anything with them. So while it looks great, there isn't a whole lot to interact with except for the local wildlife. That said, you are able to visit a gas station, which is bizarrely cool to see given the mundanity of such an area. And there's also a chocobo ranch at which I can only assume you'd be able to rent chocobos in the full game. But as it is now, the open world is really just a world map with a lot more detail and a bunch of wide-eyed camera panning moments. Now, of course, this could be subject to change, and I also know that the full game will have tons of different areas to explore, and you'll also get the car as an alternative mode of transport, but that wasn't available in the demo. Apparently, there's a section in the game where the car breaks down and they need to kill a behemoth to get money to pay for the repairs. The demo is built around that segment. Part of me kind of feels like they could have picked a better part to showcase, maybe. Then again, I'd rather not have main gameplay features be spoiled by playing through possibly unfinished mechanics. Now, as for the battle system, it's pretty much Final Fantasy XII and Kingdom Hearts combined, in that the combat has a more hands-on approach and most of the tactical stuff is pre-planned. So whenever you approach a monster on the field, ominous music starts playing, and you get a red bar at the top of your screen signaling that there's a red bar at the top of your screen. When that happens, you have the option to either engage in combat or ignore it and run along. Should you choose to give the local wildlife a piece of your mind, the battle theme will start playing and you'll initiate combat mode just as always. Only now, the battles will take place in real time without an ATB bar and you no longer have to scroll through menus like you still had to do in Kingdom Hearts, which is pretty good. I mean, while the combat in the Kingdom Hearts games was mostly fine, it was really hampered by the interface in a lot of ways. Like, you'd only have to try summoning during a boss battle to find that it maybe wasn't the most intuitive battle system ever. Luckily, in Final Fantasy 15, everything except for the item menu is directly mapped to the buttons as it would be in a regular action or hack and slash game. However, you don't have to repeatedly press buttons as one might think. No, you need to hold down said button for as long as you want to execute a certain move. So, for instance, you need to hold down square to make Noctis start hacking away at shit, and you need to hold down the L1 button to make Noctis guard. Now, while guarding, a well-timed button press will allow Noctis to parry with a counterattack. And while this isn't much, it does add a very basic layer of hack-and-slash style combat that, at least for the duration of this demo, did more than enough for me to make the battles fun. Apart from that, Noctis also has the ability to warp towards an enemy or hang from a ledge during battle. Warping, just like dodging and parrying, now costs MP. I kinda get the feeling that MP is now more like a substitute for not having an ATB gauge rather than just regular mana points. So, you know, players won't be able to spam certain actions. Now, since there isn't any magic available in this demo, it's hard for me to tell how the amount of MP you'll have will hold up against how much you'll actually need. I mean, in the demo, doing things like warping, guarding, and parrying wasn't much of an issue at all. But I can imagine that when you also have magic to worry about, you might have to start using something like the warp a bit more sparingly. Anyway, in terms of HP, you don't just get one, but a whopping 2 bars, being a white one and a red one. Basically, it's kinda like some first-person shooters where you have a shield that gradually replenishes, while your actual HP, represented separately, will still only be vulnerable when that shield is down. So when the white bar reaches 0, all Noctis can do is run around and heal either through a potion or just by waiting. And when the red bar reaches 0, it's game over. However, you do have the option to summon when the white bar is empty. And even though all you get in the demo is Ramu, it's already one of the coolest fucking things I've seen in a while, and I can't wait to see what the other summons will look like. Now, while the white bar will replenish by itself, your party members also have the ability to help each other up. And I must say that I'm actually quite surprised to see how well it works. I mean, the AI is actually pretty good, and they never fail to do what do in battle. Also, they always seem to be able to find their way around the map as well. Anyway, just like in Final Fantasy XIII, HP is always revived automatically after battle, which just so happens to be one of the few mechanics from 13 I actually liked. I mean, having to worry about potions and ethers and shit all the time always kinda discouraged me from actually using the battle system to its fullest. Although you could argue that the auto heal makes everything a lot easier and that it takes away any incentive to still keep on buying potions. Overall, though, I had a lot of fun with the battle system, and I honestly expected it to be boring because of how much of it is automated. But it's actually a pretty hands-on experience, and the parrying and dodging keeps it from being as passive as Final Fantasy XIII was. Also, it's really quite satisfying to launch yourself at a group of enemies and hack away like a madman. If I could sum it up, I'd say it's like a less menu-driven and more streamlined version of the Kingdom Hearts battle system. And I can totally see this carrying a longer game, given that they'll add some more abilities over time. Anyway, apart from all the hacking and slashing, the game obviously still has some RPG mechanics, although they've been pushed to the background. If anything, it's a lot like the Gambit system from Final Fantasy XII, so you get to pre-program a set selection of actions prior to battle instead of deciding what to do when you're actually doing it. The way you do that here is through a system called Weapon Decks. And, well, so far I don't really have a whole lot to say. I mean, the game explains it rather briefly and shows it exists, but it's not really used all that much in the demo. Now, in terms of leveling up, you still gain experience from battles as usual. The only difference being is that instead of leveling up whenever you gather a certain amount of EXP, you save up all EXP until you rest at a bonfire, where it then gets divided amongst your party members as it normally would. Now, of course, you can't have a bonfire without a healthy meal to keep you going. And depending on what kind of ingredients you have, the meal will give you a couple of buffs that'll slowly peter out as the next day continues. Now, I can imagine that they might have to do something different during longer events, since you'd still need to be able to level up before boss fights. I mean, setting up a bonfire in the middle of a war zone in a big city like the one shown at E3 could maybe be a little bit weird. But as it is right now in the demo, I did like it quite a bit. And I can imagine that it could get pretty deep as well when mucking around with rare ingredients. And I guess it would also be a pretty good incentive to go out on side quests more often if you have the possibility to get some crazy buffs out of it that you could use later. Now, in terms of performance, the game ran in 720p and the frame rate was a little bit iffy. Thing is, the game drops frames like a motherfucker every time an event happens. And there's also quite a bit of texture pop-in going on as well. Square, however, has commented on this, and they said that they'll aim for a better performance for the full game. Here's hoping they'll actually strive for a solid 60 FPS, though I highly doubt that'll be the case in the console versions. Personally though, I don't really care all that much for performance. But I would like it if the texture pop-in was a bit less in my face whenever the camera decides to show something off. Anyway, overall I'd say it's a pretty fucking good demo, and maybe even great. Though it's a bit hard to say how exactly the full game will be based on what we got to see here. I mean, I doubt that the game will be bad. I'm just not sure how much fun the battle system and open world aspects will be after hours of playing. Still, I feel pretty fucking confident that Final Fantasy 15 will be nothing short of amazing. Well, that is assuming that the story won't be awful and that it won't end up dragging everything down. But the characters seemed fun and cheerful enough, so I doubt that'll be the case. So yeah, 10 out of 10, Cindy as Bae, Waifu of the Year.